Hey, this is Kalen, and welcome to The Drop.
In today's episode, part 4 of our Delta Conveyance Project series, we sit down with the general manager of the State Water Contractors to hear her side of this multi-billion-dollar proposition. Let's dive in. So I'm joined today by General Manager of the State Water Contractors, Jennifer Pierre. We're going to talk about a few topics today, including your organization, but especially really continuing upon the series, the unofficial series that we've got going on Delta Conveyance Project. But first and foremost, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You've been General Manager of State Water Contractors for 10 years almost? Does that sound about right?
Almost. This year's
Okay.
marks March, this month marks 9 years at State Water Contractors.
That's great. I'm assuming you enjoy it because 10 years of doing something you don't enjoy I can't imagine doing. So
It's never boring. All sorts of things going on. Every half hour is a different topic.
yeah, that's pretty consistent. It sounds like in the water world is never boring.
Yes.
First and foremost, before we talk about the organization, tell me about you. Where did you start? How did you get to your current role?
My background is in conservation biology. I studied at UC Davis. Before that, I grew up in Modesto, California. I had family in LA and also in the Sacramento Valley and in the Bay Area, and I spent a lot of time in the car. And unfortunately for me as a child, but maybe fortunately for me as an adult, was quizzed repeatedly on how water moved around the state and how trees were farmed and harvested. And I'm pretty sure that probably subconsciously seeped into my bones and caused me to land where I am today. But fundamentally, as a individual who studied environmental sciences back in the early 2000s, that was a time when I would say what I was studying, people were like, "What are you talking about, and what even is that?" And we don't ask that question anymore, of course, but it's because it's who I am. I think that there are solution spaces for making California the greatest place to live, as well as protecting our environment. I really fully believe in that, and so my role at the State Water Contractors really allows me to find that space of delivering water to people and farms, cities, businesses, making the state work in the way that we've set our population centers up, as well as protecting the environment. And that's really what I focus on in my work in the Delta.
What brought you to State Water Contractors, I guess, 10 years ago?
So I, out of college, started working at a firm, a consulting firm, and I was immediately assigned to the South Delta Improvement Program, which was a CalFed project that was supposed to increase water deliveries from the existing South Delta facilities. Then I worked on the Sassoon Marsh Plan, again as a consultant to the Department of Water Resources. I worked on the CVP State Water Project Intertie project. I worked on the Bay Delta Conservation Project. And so many of the contractors that have been heavily involved in those planning activities got to know me. I served as typically the environmental lead on those projects. So when my predecessor, Terry Erlewine, announced his retirement, I was approached and asked to apply for this job. And I didn't really want to take it, actually. I was really happy doing what I was doing. I lived in a place I really liked. My kids were very young, and I was flattered that they thought I could do the job, but wasn't for me. But they were persistent, and I'm very glad that we ended up together. I think it's a really good match. The contractors really knew at the moment that environmental regulations and science were going to be the drivers on our water supply, and knew that they needed to have somebody that could speak that language, understand that, and help guide with that in mind. And that's really, again, kind of the core of who I am professionally.
So let's talk State Water Contractors. For those who aren't aware of what is the organization, what's the role, the mission, purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question because I didn't even really know, even after having worked for DWR for so long.
Thanks
Because
for wanting me. I don't know who you are, but
right,
thank you.
exactly. I think we all know who Metropolitan Water District of Southern California are, and up in Sacramento, Valley Water from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, Kern County Water Agency. Those are some of our more active members, but there are 29 public water agencies who all signed up to participate in the State Water Project. And the State Water Project is owned and operated by the state of California, Department of Water Resources. And so our very creative state water contractor name reflects that there are water agencies who contract with the state of California for water. So state water
Yeah.
contractors.
You can never be too straightforward in this type of work.
Exactly. So there's 29 of those public water agencies. The vast majority of them are wholesalers. They are moving water into their regions. 27 of those agencies are the members of our organization. And the two that are not members are Butte and Plumas counties. They're where they divert water and how they conduct business, and the volume of water that they use is very different than our other members. So we coordinate with them on things like contract amendment and where you really need to have the full 29 in alignment, but there's 27 members. So those 27 members deliver water to as far north as Yuba City, which is north of Sacramento, into Napa and Solano counties, Santa Clara County, Alameda County, a tiny bit in Contra Costa County. We skip over the Santa Cruz and Monterey areas, and then we go right into San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, Ventura, Los Angeles, San Diego, Riverside, Kern County, Kings County. I believe I covered them all, but we serve 27 million people altogether
Wow.
and 750,000 acres of farmland. And those 27 million people, on average, receive about 30% of their water supply from the State Water Project. It varies year to year, but it's a really critical water source for most Californians. Or you could even say 1 in 12 Americans receive 30% of their water from the State Water Project.
Yeah.
Huge number of people.
At Eastern, we are very much, we really try and pride ourselves on the diversification of our sourcing. But I mean, water from State Water Project is huge for us, obviously. And we've got a really dynamic recycle water program, groundwater programs, but I can speak down here. We are in the middle of the desert, and it's still our primary source.
Yeah, I think that's the case for a lot of the Riverside County and other Inland Empire agencies. For the most part, those agencies, just like Eastern, really tapped into their local sources initially in the 60s as growth was occurring, and through Metropolitan really made investments in State Water Project, knowing growth was coming, and now the growth is here. And just like Eastern, a lot of agencies already have adjudicated groundwater basins, adjudicated streams, they're recycling water, they're implementing conservation measures, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of affordable housing is actually occurring in your region and around you.
Yeah.
And the only real alternative that's affordable is State Water Project. So that's not unique to Eastern, but it is something that I think people don't realize is that if we are going to have affordable housing, the regions that are most likely to support that are the same regions that happen to be kind of in need of the State Water Project because the other potential sources have already been maximized.
Right. And actually, I'm going to bring that up again later. But tell me about your relationship with California Department of Water Resources.
Sure. So the California Department of Water Resources owns and operates the State Water Project. They make all the decisions about budget, about how to operate, and the State Water Contractors pay all the bills. So it's not, always the best part of the partnership, but we have a really good relationship with DWR. We work collaboratively with them at the executive level, the management level, the field division level. Our job in the contractors is really to try to understand why decisions are being made, to present perspectives across the contractors. So rather than DWR hearing 27 different voices, we really try to work on what do we see as the need for the State Water Project and communicate that in hopes that that helps the dialogue, and I think it does. So very, very good relationship with them. But it is an odd situation in that, they are deciding while we are paying, and collectively the state contractors pay about $1.3 billion a year. So it's a significant source of funding, and it is from our contractors. So we try to understand, again, their decision making and encourage good decision making, good asset management, water allocations that reflect the hydrology, and that allow us to plan. So, we interact. That is the primary function of our organization, I would say, until very recently. So, again, my predecessor was an engineer. A lot of work was really from the contractors to DWR. That was the primary work of our organization. In the last few years, I think it's become very obvious that there's a lot of policy being set around us. And so we have made a concerted effort to better engage with regulatory agencies, the legislature, business groups, labor groups, and others that we want to make sure are aware of the decisions they make, the things they support or oppose, and what that means for both water reliability and affordability on the State Water Project. So while we have expanded our role to be more external, that engagement with DWR remains a very foundational and critical function for us to understand how the project's being operated and funded.
And how important is that collaboration or that relationship with sort of your member agencies, or I don't know, is constituents a word for it?
Yeah, I think that certainly, these are water agencies that have contracts with the state. So they have every right to interact as a contract holder with the state, and they do individually. But I think that collectively, for many issues specific to the State Water Project, it is beneficial for DWR to understand this is the collective perspective of their contractors. This is the collective, recommendation. This is, or this is a collective angst, or, whatever it is we're feeling, I think makes it easier for us to work through those issues. So, we do see ourselves as a liaison in a lot of ways. One of the things that we do, for example, is track a lot of the asset management and infrastructure work, not just because we pay for it all, but just understanding, is this being conducted in a cost-effective way? Is this being conducted in a way that we would agree has looked at, the value proposition of doing certain alternatives in different ways, or that assure us that we're not going to have major issues with water reliability and delivery. So that's not to say DWR is doing anything wrong. It's just, we have 27 water agencies that all also have capital projects who can bring insight and expertise to the conversation. Again, DWR makes all the decisions, but having that, expanded expertise, I would hope, is helpful to the State Water Project and to DWR. And I think that under different leadership at DWR, there's been differing levels of embracing that relationship. I would say, luckily, under Director Namath, there's a significant interest in our perspective, and that's not to say that they always agree with it, but I think we've been able to have really healthy dialogue, and I think that the decisions are better for it. And so I do hope that, if Carla ever leaves and new administration comes in, that we continue to have that sort of healthy relationship and open policy for dialogue.
I want to give kind of an overview here. I'm going to ask you some silly basic questions, but this is for those who have been hiding under rocks.
Okay, my favorite color is blue.
Okay, so can you tell me the role of the Delta in California's water system?
Sure. So the Delta is where the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River meet and converge, and then they flow together under the Golden Gate Bridge. And about 90% of all of the state's water comes from these watersheds. So it's it touches so many areas of the state. Really, unless you're sitting in the North Coast, like Sonoma, Mendocino areas, or you're somewhere on the Eastern Sierras, you're probably getting some portion of your water from the State Water Project or the Delta. So the State Water Project, like many other users, diverts water from the Delta. We are a large diverter, but the Delta itself has people from San Francisco diverting from it, the East Bay Area of the Bay, San Francisco Bay Area. It's feeds rice farms throughout the Sacramento Valley, lots of trees and other farming. So again, 90% of all the water is connected to this Delta watershed. So we are part of that, and our water originates primarily in Lake Oroville, which is north of Sacramento on the Feather River. And the idea is that the water would flow down the Feather River from Oroville, which contractors pay 100% of cost for, down the Feather, down the Sacramento River, into the Delta, where we divert the water. And that's the way our system's set up. Others have systems set up in the Delta where they're diverting upstream of the Delta or in the Delta. But the Delta really becomes the hub of where the vast majority of supply in the state enters. And so a lot of people have diversions in that Delta, and so do we. So I will say, though, that, well, we can get to something that's less basic, but I do want to come back to the fact that I think this year is underscoring that our water supply is actually less and less tied to those reservoir conditions. So we're seeing full reservoirs and very low allocations, which means how much water does the Department of Water Resources tell the contractors they should expect to receive in any given year. And even though the system was set up that the reservoir is really where we're collecting our water right and moving it through the Delta, what we're finding is that our water right is really more coming from what's called excess flow, which means everybody in the whole system has taken what they are obligated or are allowed to take. Fish and wildlife requirements have been met, water quality requirements have been met. Whatever's left over, the State Water Project is allowed to take. That's where the vast majority of our water is coming from. And we don't have the plumbing or the operations to really take advantage of that. And so that's kind of where DCP comes in and other actions that the contractors are working on. But the Delta becomes kind of you could call it a hub, you could also call it a bottleneck for water supply.
Does age of the infrastructure have anything to play into that, would you say?
It does. I mean, I think that's certainly a factor. This system is about 60 years old. And so it does, it has reached its kind of planned for life, and in many regards. This is part of why we're so engaged with DWR and asset management, because it's more cost effective to repair things before they break than after they do, and how you prioritize that to minimize risks to supply and also to humans that are working around these facilities. So that is certainly a factor. When you look at the Delta, for example, the levees in the Delta were all constructed over 100 years ago. They were not engineered facilities. When you look at our canals that are moving water from northern, the Delta down into Southern California, those have significantly been damaged by groundwater extraction that has caused the ground to collapse under them. So that's not just aging infrastructure, but damaged infrastructure. You have a number of pumps and pipes and dikes and weirs and all sorts of things that, they are getting to the end of their life. And so that is part of the cost of the State Water Project is, constant maintenance and repair of these facilities. And that is a big deal. So in the Delta itself, you've got the levees that are helping to, route water around to different places, as well as protecting the water quality. You also have our pumping facilities, which are 60 years old and would never be constructed the way that they were if we were constructing them to today, knowing now what we didn't know then. And so they're not failing, but it's also not the ideal location for water exports.
Was subsidence, or is subsidence part of that issue too that you were referencing?
Yeah, so that's our sinking canals. So those are basically the canal. If you drive up and down I-5, you see two canals. One is owned by the state, that's State Water Project. One is owned by the federal government, that's the Central Valley Project. They have similar damages to them because of, again, the sinking of the ground underneath them. And so we're losing freeboard, or really how much water can be contained in them. And they're gravity fed. And so as they sink, the gravity feed stops working and we can no longer move water. And DWR predicts that by 2045, if we don't make repairs, we will not be moving any water through the State Water Project. So we are adequately freaked out about that.
Yeah.
And the cost of repairing that just for the State Water Project is $3 billion. So we're currently seeking legislation. We're actually working with Senator McNierney, who represents Delta communities who are often at odds with us over Delta issues, but we're working together to seek funding for both Delta levee repair money and subsidence repair dollars to have an ongoing funding source for each of those things, recognizing the systematic nature of all our infrastructure and the fact that these two sets of infrastructure are needed no matter what we do about the tunnel, which is the one thing, I think we'll never be on the same page about with the Delta.
And for reference, that bill is AB 2215, which EMWD actively supports.
The subsidence issue, so I work primarily on the local level here, so most of my education on this is coming from our government affairs group. But so the subsidence, is it as a result of us basically of water, the underground, the groundwater being extracted, and effectively the ground is lowering as that's happening?
That's right. So in the Central Valley in particular, during droughts, farmers who have especially permanent crops will, turn to groundwater to offset a reduction in deliveries of surface water. They've got trees to keep alive. And when they've done that, they have drilled into an aquifer, and you can think of like the soil as having a bunch of spaces in between it originally where water could sit in between the spaces. And when you extract that water out, the soil kind of collapses on itself. So in some instances, depending on the soil, you can put water back in the ground and reestablish those porous spaces. But in other regards, like for clay or other types of soils, you're not going to, once you take it out, you can't really put it back in. So the damage, so by that collapsing that it has occurred, it's caused the infrastructure on top of it to also collapse. It's not just the aqueduct or the canal, it's also roads and bridges, anything that sits on top of on those lands that have been impacted by this.
Well, now I'm adequately freaked out. So thank
Okay,
you
good.
for that. It sounds to me like you and I had very similar car rides during our childhoods. I grew up with two public servant parents, one of whom worked for the water district his whole career. And this was something that was talked about when I was a kid. So this is not a new discussion, these types of improvements. I mean, this has been around since well before I was in the industry.
We've been living off of investments that were made 60 years ago. And we've really not made the investment. And in true California form, I'm worried we're going to wait for a crisis to do something about it. And one thing I'd really like to see is us actively pursue the things we already know we need to do to avoid that crisis. It'll be cheaper. It'll be less environmentally damaging. It'll be less chaotic. All of these things are advantages of being proactive about doing the things we know we need to do versus waiting for there to be some catastrophe to do the thing we know we need to do. And we can watch subsidence occur, and that's kind of a slow moving issue. We can watch climate change occur. I'd argue that feels a little bit slow moving as well, although I think it's becoming more and more obvious because we all have lived experiences around significant drought or flooding or storms or wind or fires or all the different things that are effectuated by climate change. But we're not, when and if there's an earthquake in the Delta, when and if we continue to have significant drying of the atmosphere, which is really what caused the last drought we were in, these things are going to happen rapidly to us, and we are not prepared for them. Something
Director Nemeth and really all the guests who've talked about this have all kind of echoed is that, it's an expensive proposition, but it's not nearly as expensive as waiting for it all to break, and then we have to fix it.
Right. That's true. And it's not nearly as expensive as many of the alternatives other agencies have looked at, including yours.
Yeah.
So that is true. I mean, that's what I worry about. I think that people continue to put forth, well, what about this alternative? And what about that alternative? And, I jokingly tell people, but I mean it, this is not fun to work on. And we're not doing it because we're stubborn or that we picked this idea 20 years ago and we're just, too behind the times to catch up. Every time we look at what needs to happen to shore up the State Water Project, we come back to a Delta Conveyance facility of some sort. And I think Graham has done an amazing job really bringing this project from what was really a concept, has been a concept for a very long time. Peripheral Canal, BDCP, Water Fix were always really kind of concepts. He's brought it to a real project. This is something that can be constructed. There is real parcels identified and real impacts and real construction approaches. All of these things, and these will be valuable to us whether the project gets built under emergency or under a planned approach, which is what we're working towards. But every day that goes by that we're not under construction is a $1.5 million increase in costs in the project.
Wow.
So it's over $300 million in cost increases a year. And the delay and the kind of constant conversation about, well, what about this or what about that? And there surely must be something else to do instead of this, is only driving up the cost for the one thing we know we're going to have to do eventually.
Can you give me the high-level explanation of what this project looks like then in its current form or its current proposition?
Sure. So I mentioned that our current export facilities are located where we would never put them today. They're at the dead end of the bottom of the Delta, and that seems to not be a great place for fish. And so oftentimes our pumping is throttled back because we are protecting fish and not trying to draw them into our pumps, which is what we should be doing, right? We should be protecting the environment. We have Endangered Species Act compliance and California Endangered Species Act compliance rules for endangered fish species. At the current facilities, we're still in training 1% of the population. It's very low depending on the species, but it's for each of the species that we're protecting. It's all very, very low in trainment. And so we have figured out how to minimize impacts to the environment, but we've done so at an expense to our water supply. And in times of significant flow through the Delta, if there are fish present in front of those pumps, it doesn't matter how much flow is coming through the Delta, those pumps will be restricted. So the State Water Contractors pay for pumping capacity of 10,300 CFS, canal capacity to move that. All of our O&M costs are being driven towards that original design capacity. But even during storms, for example, in January of this year, I don't recall seeing anything greater than like 6,000 or 7,000 CFS. So just barely over half of what our actual physical capacity is to move water. And that all has to do with the location of the existing export. So the idea is that under the Delta Conveyance Project, you would continue those same operations in the South Delta. But as I mentioned earlier, there's these instances where we have what's called excess flow, which means there's a lot of water in the system and all the water quality parameters have been met, all of the Endangered Species Act requirements have been met, all the senior water rights holders and farmers and everybody that has more senior water rights than the State Water Project have already taken what they are supposed to take, or those rules have been met. Then and only then would the tunnel be used to divert that excess flow, which is our current water right, just not necessarily at that location. So the idea is if we can add a point of diversion in the Delta that doesn't have the same issues in location, then we will be able to restore our water right and use our capacity in our water right. And that's what this project's all about as it relates to kind of status quo. However, you would never build a large infrastructure these days and not have some redundancy in your system. And so the tunnel also provides redundancy if there were to be an earthquake, which the USGS continues to increase their prediction on both the magnitude and likelihood of a major earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is right next door to the Delta. The Delta, it is the San Francisco Bay Delta is its official name. And so it should something like that occur, or even a levee breach that we've seen a few even occur on sunny days recently, this would allow for uninterrupted supply to Southern California and throughout our service area. If we don't have a tunnel or this redundant system and we were to have an earthquake that impacted our levee system and caused the Pacific Ocean to kind of intrude into our Delta, which would happen because it's a whole ocean, depending on the specific conditions, it could be 3 months to 3 years before we could restore water deliveries to Southern California.
Wow.
And if you put that in the context of the drying Colorado River and droughts, that is a very scary thing to think about. And so it does feel a little bit of a race against the clock, not just for affordability of that project, but to mitigate against that potential to occur.
Well, the good news is earthquakes definitely never happen in California.
Right, and
so
droughts
how
on
could that
Colorado
possibly-
either. Those two things are out. So
we're fine.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
And tunnel opponents will argue that. So we
Yeah.
laugh now, but that's what we hear. I've lived
Really?
here. My family's been here for 100 years. There's never been an earthquake. So I'm gonna go with
All right.
the USGS prediction
Yeah.
for purposes of planning supply for 27 million people.
So there's a lot of discussion going on between water agencies, state agencies, stakeholder groups all around. What do those discussions look like? How are they occurring?
On this project, on Delta Conveyance, I think that there's a set of stakeholders in the Delta that, will oppose this forever and they've used every avenue to oppose this. I think they are probably actually the minority in the Delta, but they are the loudest voice. I think there are people in the Delta that are wanting to work with the department to figure out how to, avoid impacts to them. I mean, this is a large construction project. And I
Right.
think it's important to acknowledge that this will impact people's commutes and, how they experience outdoors. It's a large project. And I think DWR has done a tremendous job in their community benefits outreach, trying to, and Graham in realigning the footprints and of not just the structure, the tunnel itself and its shafts, but also how goods and labor move in and out of the region. So there's ongoing dialogue of that nature. I think that there's a growing curiosity and awareness that that we need to do something about this, and that a lot of opposition thinks we'll just build more recycled or do desal. And I think even Eastern's looked at things, and I think you've concluded they're not affordable or feasible options for you. And I think that's the case for many agencies. That's not necessarily not the case. I mean, I think Metropolitan's Pure Water, LA's Pure Water, I mean, there are other projects, local projects, and our agencies are doing everything they can. But at the end of the day, this project, if we're going to have a state water project, needs to be constructed. And I will add that all of the public water agencies that contract with DWR, except I believe Plumas County, have signed a contract extension with the department obligating them to pay for the state water project through 2085. That's not to pay for the tunnel, but it's to pay for the project. And those costs become stranded assets if we don't also improve the way we're moving our water through the implementation of the tunnel. So we have a lot of coordination with amongst our participating contractors. There's 18 of them, including Metropolitan Water District, that all work together. There's also the Design and Construction Authority, Graham's organization, which is really tasked with building and constructing and designing, in the opposite order that I just said them, the tunnel. And I think that was one of the first cost-saving measures that the contractors really wanted to have and implemented. I believe it was in 2019, 18 or 19, that organization was stood up because that was a way of ensuring that there could be oversight by the public water agencies in the costs and in the design of the facility. So there's a lot of dialogue and coordination that occurs at that level amongst the participants. And we just continue to engage housing groups, business groups, labor groups. I think many people in this state want California to win. And they want California to be a place that the next generation can affordably and enjoyably live.
Yeah.
And we are not on that track right now on a number of issues. Obviously, housing is the most pressing issue. And I think energy costs are right behind. And I would say water is the third and is quickly, getting more and more attention. But just as housing had to get to a crisis point for discussion, I'm hoping we don't have to get there for water.
Well, this is an area we're sensitive to because, I mean, we're one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing region in the state. Houses are going up every day, even here still. I just bought my first home this last fall.
Congratulations.
And thank you. But it was hard to get to this point because it's expensive. I mean, even out here still, people still call us the last bastion of affordability, and it's quickly becoming not the case. But we're growing so fast still. And I guess, my question is, is this sustainable with the current water infrastructure?
I don't really see that California has a scarcity issue. I think
Mhm.
we have a management issue. And I think that I always surprise people when I tell them what I'm about to say to you. It's very easy to see the Colorado River is drying, and it obviously gets a lot of press and attention. It serves 40 million people, and it's such an
Mhm.
important source of water for, economies and people and tribes and the environment in the West. But that is not what's happening in the Delta. In the Delta, if you look at the most extreme climate modeling, which DWR did, and what they call their delivery capability report, they looked at what they said was a 95% level of concern of climate change. And what they found was that there's only a change of about 1% in total precipitation in the Delta system.
Mhm.
It's not drying, it's shifting. It's shifting from snow to rain, which means we don't have that slow snowpack runoff. It
Right.
means when it comes, you have to find a place to move it and store it right away. You don't have like the lag time and the multiple months of runoff. And it also means, as I'm seeing here today in Sacramento, it's 85 degrees here today, and it's March. And March used to be kind of the end of winter.
Mhm.
And what we're seeing from this modeling and in our lived experience is that the winter time is shrinking. And so you might only have a change of 1% precipitation, but you better figure out what you're going to do with it between December and February in terms of moving it and storing it for the other, 9 months that are dry and subsequent droughts. So I don't think that it's not, the fact that the water is here is very positive. The question
Right.
is, can we manage it? Can we move and store water when it's wet so that when it's dry, we're not in an emergency? To me, that's the goal. That's everything the state water contractors are working on. The tunnel is the biggest, loudest expression of that.
Mhm.
But our work to do adaptive management in the South Delta right now to say, hey, when there's flood releases happening and there's a ton of water moving under the Golden Gate Bridge and there's no fish in front of our pumps, we should turn the pumps on and move that water. It's us saying we should build the tunnel. It's us saying we should use Furo to figure out how to better predict incoming storms into the reservoirs. It's us talking about groundwater recharge and other storage mechanisms to really find places to put the water when it's available, whether that be in the San Joaquin Valley and some of these subsided areas we talked about, or in places like San Bernardino that has enough groundwater storage that's equal to the size of Lake Shasta,
Mhm.
or the Antelope Valley, or the Mojave Desert, or we have so many places on the State Water Project. So that's that's the goal here, and hopefully in doing so, we're taking ourselves out of the contribution to pressure under dry conditions that the environment experiences under those conditions because we've safeguarded ourselves in those wetter conditions when it was safer to take the water. That's the goal. That's what the tunnel's trying to
Right.
do. That's everything we're trying to do. Did I answer your question?
You did. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah.
just like go
I,
off, so I'm like,
no, what you're saying makes sense. I mean, it's not necessarily that the supply is down; it's that the occurrence of rain is just more
right.
volatile.
And our infrastructure is
So,
not. We built reservoirs to capture snow melt and
mhm.
channels to move it as it melted in the spring to places where the demand was going to grow in the summer. That's our
Right.
whole infrastructure. That doesn't work anymore. My epiphany of every year I have a new epiphany on water. This year's epiphany is reservoir conditions are no longer dictating what water we receive. And you can look across. We had a declaration for the first time in 25 years. There's no drought in California. The reservoirs are all above average, but guess what? Our allocation's at 30%.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is the hydrology and the operations and infrastructure are no longer matching up.
Mhm.
So we can't change the hydrology. All we can change is the infrastructure and how we operate to it. And that's what we got to do.
I get asked a lot locally from our customer base. Are we in a drought? Especially, usually that question's going to come right after it rains.
Hmm.
In this case, I always try and answer, especially right now, when we got the rains, was technically no, but ask me tomorrow.
Right. That's right.
Because
Well,
it's just
Yeah.
it's
Dr. Jeff Mount of UC Davis always says, you're just, what he would say, it's just like, well, when it's raining, it's just one flood in between a bunch of droughts or something like that, where it's like, yes, we get rain sometimes, but it's California. We're in a drought.
Yeah. EMWD, I mean, we're a pretty large agency. We're one of the sixth largest in the state, but we're still a local agency. What is the role of an agency like ours, local water districts around the state? What is our role in trying to support this?
Education. Education to your leaders, education to your ratepayers. People think their food comes from a grocery store, the light comes from the switch, and the water comes from the tap.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not true. I mean, hopefully that all works out, but it takes a whole infrastructure behind those things to make them happen. And I think the more people understand their sources of water, the better. I have challenged local agencies to have right up front on their website, our water comes from X, Y, Z. Here's our percent, because I think people need to know that. And I think if they understand where their water comes from, we can have more intelligent conversations about how to protect those water supplies, how to talk about the trade-offs economically and environmentally about those supplies. And I think hopefully make it easier for our board members to discuss rates and make investments and talk about, why you might pursue a project that the Sierra Club might say you should never, ever, ever do. I don't mean to pick on them, but, they are typically the ones opposing projects. So I think that's really where local agencies can do a lot of work. There really isn't a centralized kind of water leader in the state. You don't have that in the legislature. You don't have that. Obviously there's a director of Department of Water Resources and an administration, but I do think that water policy is definitely a committee sport. And I think having as many people on the quote unquote committee understanding what is really being faced by local water agencies allows your assembly members, your congressmen, your senators, your whoever to show up and say, hey, this is my region's water supply. This is what's important to my region, and I want to be part of that conversation. And I think right now, if all people know is my water comes from the tap, then when things come up that are either opportunities or threats to different water supplies, including the State Water Project, there's not a good position. The people don't understand that that's their water supply. In fact, when I started this job and we had just started kind of doing some education outreach, I remember talking to a senator who I'm not going to name, a California state senator, who's no longer there, and talking about the 27 million people's water supply that is provided by the State Water Project. And this person said, well, that's not, who are those people? And I'm like, it's your district, because almost every single district in the whole state, it's far more than half the legislature represents State Water Project, and even more than that are touched by it. So I think it's just a lot of helping people understand those are yours, you are them.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, we always joke, like, water, everything's underground, so if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. Like, we joke, but it's not a joke. People aren't thinking about us unless something's wrong.
That's right.
If everything's going right, they don't give us a second thought.
That's right. We do our jobs too well. I'm hearing that a lot recently from a lot of water managers, and I joke sometimes, let's just turn the State Water Project off for a couple weeks. No one will die.
See what happens.
But maybe you'll notice. So we won't do that. Don't worry, public.
No, that really is our biggest. I mean, we run pretty dynamic education campaigns out here, and I like to say, like, we actually have a pretty educated customer base here. I mean, for the most part, but it really is true. There's so much going on in the world. It's information overload, and if we're doing our job right, they don't think about us. So
well, I'll just give you a recommendation since you're an outreach person. So I was down in Orange County a couple of months ago. I get really excited when I'm in the State Water Project service area. Sacramento is not. So whenever I'm in Southern California, or I was over in San Jose a few weekends ago, I was like, this is so exciting. None of this could have been here without the State Water Project. I get very excited. So I remember getting on an on-ramp to the freeway down in Orange County with my 14-year-old son, and I was like, we're entering the State Water Project service area. And he was like, oh, is there a sign? And I was like, that's a great idea. You know how you're like, we're entering X watershed or X forest or whatever. It's like entering, so I wonder, anyway, that's a dream of mine to have, entering the State Water Project service area, leaving State Water Project service area. That'd be a fun thing just to raise awareness, but I don't know how much signs cost these days. We'd rather fix the canals.
Yeah, fair enough. Put the money towards that. Yeah. I'm going to let you kind of have final word here, but in closing, Tell us about State Water Contractors' role in all of this, just moving forward, and any last thoughts that you'd like to leave with our listeners.
I think that what I would really hope for is that we can have honest conversations about the environmental and economic trade-offs of everything we're doing. Everything humans do has an impact, and that includes the movement and development of water supply. But I would hope that we can continue to engage in honest dialogue about what those trade-offs are so that leaders can make decisions that balance those as best as they can. We do think that we have done that with Delta Conveyance Project. We do think that we do that with science-based adaptive management provisions that we promote. And I think that I would implore voters and listeners to really think about how you hear candidates talk about those trade-offs because we all would like to live in a world where we weren't impacting the environment, but we do need to think about how we live in this world and what that really means. And so I guess I would just encourage people to think about their own standard of living and what they expect out of the state and vote accordingly.
I wanna know your name.